Star Wars Jedi Survivor is one of those games that you wait years and years for, and no matter how long it takes to develop, mostly everyone stays excited for the title, and because of the trust you have in the developer, you say to yourself, oh, there's just no way that things can go wrong with this game. Welcome to Is It Worth It, the video series where we don't look at some arbitrary review score, but instead we analyze whether a game is actually worth its price tag. And as Jedi Survivor is one of those massive AAA titles, its price tag is of course $69.99 across the board for all consoles. I also want to mention that I'll mostly be showing gameplay footage as to not spoil the story for you guys, and so the footage might be less interesting to look at this time around. Jedi Survivor, for those uninitiated, is the sequel to Jedi Fallen Order, where you play as Cal Kestis, a, well, Jedi that has managed to survive the famous Order 66 that purged most of the Jedi across the galaxy. In Jedi Survivor, we see a Cal who is trying to fight the Empire, and in his efforts he has become the most wanted man in the galaxy. However, that's not exactly what Jedi Survivor's story is mostly about, as shortly after the intro we land on a planet called Kobo, which introduces a new plotline with a faction that we haven't seen much of yet except in comic books. That's, however, all I can say about the story without spoiling it. Speaking of planets, you do visit several other ones than Kobo, but as Kobo sort of acts like the main hub, that's where you'll spend most of your time. Kobo's map is also pretty massive, so expect many hours to be spent exploring all the nooks and crannies of this world. This isn't to say that the other maps aren't big as well. They are, but the difference is pretty huge when you compare them to Kobo. So what is there to do on these huge maps then? Well, finding collectibles, of course. One thing that Jedi Survivor really goes hard on is the amount of customization options for Cal, like new outfits, hairstyles, beards, lightsaber parts, and more. Meaning that at the end of the day, your Cal might end up looking very different than my version. And most, if not all of these customization options can be unlocked by finding and opening chests that are hidden around the different maps. And getting to them is not always so simple, as you'll be needing special abilities and equipment for some, these being granted to you as you play through the main story. An example is the ability to dash through the air, which lets you easily reach previously unreachable places. Some of these places does not only contain chests for you to loot, but you will also at times be finding useful items that actually do make you stronger, like these weird force projections that permanently boosts Cal in one way or another. There's also quite a few puzzle chambers for you to complete throughout the game, and most of these are entirely optional. But they do provide some good fun, and I strongly suggest heading out and exploring the different maps to find these. Now, let's get down to brass tacks here. Is the performance as bad as many other reviewers have said? Well, as I've been playing on PlayStation 5, I can't exactly say whether the game runs well or not on PC. But I can say that yes, Jedi Survivor's performance is pretty bad on PS5 as well. Throughout most of my playthrough, my game has suffered from extremely unstable frame rates, and this is even more noticeable in areas with a lot of stuff going on in the background, like the starter map on Coruscant only being the first example. And even if I ran my game on performance mode, the game would frequently dip in frames, which is a massive problem not only for the game's various cutscenes, but especially for the gameplay. You see, since Jedi Survivor has very Souls-like gameplay, being able to anticipate and respond to enemy movements and attacks is crucial for you to win most fights. But because the frame rates were so unstable, there's been so many times where my timing has been off, and just after a few hours of playing, I started getting frustrated, and instead of feeling the classic satisfaction from beating a hard enemy, I just felt relieved that some of these encounters were over with. Sure, you could chalk that up to skill issues, but the fact still remains that the combat never actually feels as good as a Souls game, or better yet, Jedi Fallen Order, simply because of the unstable frame rate. Saying that, there are many things that have been improved with the combat since Fallen Order. The skill trees for the different lightsaber stances have some really cool abilities, and I can definitely see myself mastering all the stances if I could just get a stable 60 frames per second when fighting. There are a total of 5 lightsaber stances in the game, and all of them feel pretty good, like the lightsaber staff and the dual lightsabers.
Unproductive, human.
But my personal favorite has to be the crossguard lightsaber, obviously inspired by Kylo Ren's lightsaber from the Star Wars sequel movies. Instead of wielding it with one hand, however, Cal swings it around like a medieval claymore, and Respawn has really nailed making the crossguard feel heavy when you're swinging it. It's especially satisfying to see Cal cleaving droids in half like with some of the many new combat finishers. And can I just say that I love that you can activate actual dismemberment for human enemies like raiders and stormtroopers, meaning that you can now chop off arms and legs for most of the enemies you'll encounter. Unfortunately, you can't lop off anyone's head yet, but I guess Disney had to draw the line somewhere. Still though, here's hoping that Respawn decides to take the darker route in the next game and let us do the Dooku to our enemies. Enemy variety is pretty alright. I wouldn't say that it's the best, however, and I have to say that I'm pretty underwhelmed with some of the enemies at the end of the day. You'll mostly be fighting regular Imperials, battle droids, and especially raiders, and while it's always fun to cut down fodder like this, I, like many others, always look forward to the big boss fights. However, aside from the main story bosses, there are so far only 2 really unique boss encounters that are optional, and for being a game with such big maps, I was pretty disappointed that this was essentially all there was, aside from some stronger variations of normal enemies. With all this said, half of you are probably expecting me to say that Jedi Survivor is a bad game, but it really isn't. It just isn't as good as I hoped that it would be. I know that this might sound surprising to some, as aside from the performance issues, lots of outlets and YouTubers especially have been pretty outspoken on how absolutely amazing the game is underneath the technical issues. For me, however, I'd say that Respawn managed to get many things right, like the exploration, puzzles, customization options for Cal, and pretty much most of the combat and the gameplay. But then I was also let down by the pretty disappointing number of interesting bosses, some pretty much straight up irritating enemy encounters, and of course, the abysmal performance on my PS5. I also feel like some of the story elements kind of loses its footing around halfway through the game, and unfortunately, Jedi Survivor never really reaches the pure hype levels as Fallen Order did in some parts of the story. On the opposite side of the spectrum, Cameron Monaghan really shines as Cal Kestis, and I have to say that Cal has honestly become possibly my favorite Star Wars character to date since Disney bought the franchise from George Lucas. I usually don't like to say that someone's relatable because of how buzzwordy that word has become, but for Cal, I think it's only fair to describe him as such. He's really human and very relatable, in a way that I quite frankly don't think we've seen in Star Wars before, at least I haven't. And that fact alone makes up for a lot of the missed story beats for me. Oh, and I don't see this brought up a lot in other reviews, but man, the soundtrack is just incredible, and it reaches just the right notes to punch you in the feels, especially during the game's ending. All in all, is Star Wars Jedi Survivor worth buying right now? Well, yes and no. Yes, because as many others have already said, the love and care that's been put into this game by Respawn is apparent, and underneath the performance issues, what we have here is just a really good game that stumbles at times. But I cannot in full conscience recommend buying this game as of now, either for console or PC, because your experience will be hampered by the game's many issues with performance and bugs. I'd suggest waiting at least a few weeks to a month before spending your money until Respawn fixes most of the performance issues. By that point, I'd say that yeah, $70 will most definitely be worth it. And that's all for today. Thank you for watching, and a huge thank you to my channel members for keeping this channel running. You guys are amazing. MrHulthen signing out.